네, 안녕하십니까. 지금 세션은 유엔에서의 사이버 국제규범 논의 전망과 도전을 주제로 하겠습니다. 이 세션은 외교부하고 고려대학교 사이버법센터가 공동으로 주관하겠습니다. 이 자리에 계신 분들께서는 잘 아시겠지만은 지금 이 사이버는 우리가 얼마 전까지만 해도 이 가상 공간이다라 해서 상당히 좀 우리하고 먼, 또 우리가 볼 수 없는, 그래서 또 생각한데는 땅, 바다, 또 영공, 또 우주와 같은 기존의 네 개의 도메인의 새로운 인간이 만든 소위 인간의 ICT, 정보통신 기술을 통해서 만들어진 그러한 것이다 해서 생각을 했습니다만, 실제로 지금 보면은 사이버 공간은 우리 생활 그 자체가 지금 되고 있습니다. ICT라 했을 때 가장 쉬운 예는 컴퓨터고, 지금 여러분들은 컴퓨터를 통해서 인터넷으로 통신을 하고, 그런데 그러한 통신을 통해서 여러 가지 좋은 일도 생기고 또 나쁜 일도 생기고, 이제 그러다 보니 이 사이버 공간이 제기하는 문제는 정치적인 문제, 여러분 얼마 전에 2016년에 미국 대선에 어느 국가에 부당한 개입이 있었다라는 주장도 있고요. 또 경제적으로는 크로스 보더 데이터 플로우라 해서 ICT를 통한 생성된, 또 그걸 통해서 이용하는 그런 데이터의 활용의 문제로 인해서 디지털 경제를 우리가 이야기를 하고, 또 그러한 디지털 경제에서 이 개인정보의 보호라는 인권의 문제도 발생하고, 또 이러한 사이버에서의 소위 사이버 무기라는 개념도 지금 이야기를 하고 있습니다. 오늘 이 정해진 시간으로 모든 사이버 공간 관련 문제를 이야기할 수는 없고요. 마침 유엔에서는 98년에 러시아가 문제를 제기한 이후 2004년부터 소위 유엔 정부 전문가 그룹 UNGG를 통해서 사이버 공간에서의 국제 질서에 대한 논의가 계속돼 왔습니다. 다행히 2차, 3차, 4차 지지에서는 소위 컨센서스에 의한 그러한 보고서를 채택할 수 있었지만은 2016년과 17년에 활동을 한 제5차 지지는 결국 사이버 공간의 국제법이 어떻게 적용되느냐를 두고서 소위 25개 전문가들 사이에 의견 일치를 보지 못해서 소위 실패를 했습니다. 그런 중에 작년 12월에 미국과 러시아가 각각이 이 사이버 질서에 대한 논의를 위한 결의를 각각이 제출을 했고, 그 각각의 결의가 또 똑같이 채택이 됐습니다. 그래서 금년부터는 소위 기존의 UNGG가 한 번 더 계속이 되고, 또 다른 형태의 소위 말하는 오픈 엔디드 워킹 그룹이 새로 활동을 하게 됩니다. 그래서 지금 사이버 시큐리티라는 한 가지 문제를 놓고 유엔에서 두 가지 프로세스가 전개되기 때문에 어떻게 보면 국제사회에서는 상당히 혼란스러운 그러한 상황이 되고 있습니다. 그러니까 이런 상황에서 오늘 우리 세션은 유엔에서의 사이버 국제규범 논의 전망과 도전을 주제로 해서 멀리 스위스, 그리고 미국, 또 일본에서의 전문가들을 모시고, 또 우리 국내에서의 두 분 전문가들을 모시고 1시간 반 정도 토론을 하겠습니다. 그래서 우선 첫 번째는 스위스에서 오신 스타우파허 대사님을 모시고 한 20분 정도 기본 발제를 들으시고, 그리고 나서 이 미국에서 오신 우리 한국의 고대 사이버법센터의 정명현 박사께서 토론 발제를 하시고, 이어서 미국 카네기 재단의 그 미스터 베이트만께서 또 토론을 하시고 이 세 번 토론이 끝난 후에는 그 일본의 와세다 대학의 그 반자이 교수님 그리고 우리 외교원의 유진구 교수님께서 사이버에 관련된 국제법의 특정 이슈를 놓고 또 발제 토론을 하시게 됩니다. 이분들의 발제 토론 이후에 플로어를 오픈해서 여러분들께서도 또 평소 또는 오늘 이 자리에서 문제를 제기하셔서 이 정말 굉장히 이 귀중한 이 자리가 될 터인데 좀 질문도 많이 하시고 코멘트도 많이 해주시길 바라겠습니다. 그럼 우선 그 이 스위스에서 오신 다니엘 스타우파허 대사님이신데요. 이분은 스위스 정부의 대사로 계실 때도 ICT 관련 소위 사이버 디플로머시를 실제로 하셨고 또 정부에서 퇴임하신 이후엔 더 활발히 이 사이버 내지 디지털 디플로머시 활동을 하고 계십니다. 그 참 먼 길에서 오셨는데 우리 스타우파 대사님께 큰 박수 부탁드리면서 발제를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Park, for this kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me. In my previous incarnation, I was an ambassador who organized the World Summit on Information Society in 2003, and in Geneva and five in Tunis. So somehow I got stuck and never left this area. I'm really happy that we have this session today. I think it's an important topic. Of course, we have major concerns here, bigger concerns here at the conference. But thanks to Professor Park, we have also this session, and I thank the Foreign Ministry. Now, we are confronted with these two parallel processes, and that's unique, and that's what we want to talk about. This is quite a challenge for diplomats, I must say, to how to handle this, and so I'm glad you organized this panel. Sometimes, you know, there are some jingles from advertising, and one is, if you remember, you know, from Double Mint, double your pleasure, double your fun with Double Mint gum. I'm not sure that in this case this is applicable to this topic. So I think the UN system, diplomats will have quite a challenge. But before I go, if we start to discuss how to reconcile this process, let me a little bit talk about the past, how we got here, what are sort of the underlying political implications from these two superpowers who have proposed these two not competing, but complicating processes, and maybe that is are not that bad either. Maybe we discussed that. So you mentioned already this was originally a Russian initiative in 1998, and who has asked the UN to add the issue of developments in the field of information and communication in the context of international security to its agenda. The request originated with the Russian Federation, which was evidently concerned that this potent new technology could be utilized, and I quote, for purposes that are incompatible with the objectives of maintaining international stability and security, and may adversely affect security of states. This first step was influential in the UN in framing the issue of what has become known as cyberspace and the activity conducted therein, although in the original wording of information and communication technology is still favored in UN documents. The Russian initiative also contributed to situating state cyber conduct as constituting a security issue. That was the first time. And thus, the responsibility of the first committee of the UN General Assembly, which covers disarmament and international matters. Focusing on what became known as cyber security may have also contributed to an early adversarial attitude with respect to the new subject, as the United States reacted coolly to what was perceived as a Russian effort to constrain American development of so-called cyber weapons. I'm going back in time. Early Russian proposals for an international treaty restricting military use of cyber technology ran up against the general opposition of the George W. Bush administration towards multilateral arms controls accords. There was, however, enough support amid UN members for some examination of this new technology and its implications for international security that an initial governmental group of experts, the famous GGE that you heard, was established in this first 2003 and 2004 timeframe. That was the time of the WISIS, and I remember some Russian diplomats lobbying for that, with 15 member states. A GGE is a common mechanism employed at the UN to study a novel subject with a view to generating recommendations that could inform future negotiations of a multilateral agreement or other arrangements. It is important to recall that the UN GGEs operate on the basis of consensus. That is, if one or more of the representatives involved disagree with the draft report prepared by the group, nothing is released. This was the fate of the initial GG already, 2003-4, which could not produce consensus view on the significance in terms of threat to be attributed to the state exploitation of ICTs for military and national security purposes. There was also disagreement over whether information content, as opposed to infrastructure, should be subject to scrutiny from a security perspective. These two areas of disagreement have continued to mark and complicate UN efforts to develop common understandings regarding state conduct in cyberspace, and we will return to that later. Despite this initial setback, the GGG process continued, reflecting the increasing recognition that the importance of the Internet in global affairs and rising concerns over malicious cyber activity, be it undertaken by cyber criminals or by states themselves. A growing acknowledgement of the common interest that states and other stakeholders had in maintaining a peaceful cyberspace led to what now seems something of a golden period of interstate cooperation. A series, and you mentioned it, a series of GGEs succeeded in producing consensus reports in each 2010, 13, 15. Each of these reports yielded important findings and helped expand the area of common ground amongst the participant states, the P5, P3. The 2010 report highlighted the growing use of ICTs by states as instruments of warfare and intelligence, and the risk of misperception and escalation in the absence of shared norms in conduct. It recommended the development of confidence building, stability and risk reduction measures, CBMs, to address the implications of state use of ICTs. The 2013 report built significantly upon the previous GGE, introducing the significant conclusion that international law is applicable to the novel realm of cyberspace, and that it was essential, I quote, essentially maintaining peace and stability in promoting open, secure, peaceful, and accessible ICT environment. That's agreed language, which is important. And that the international law applies. Of course, what that means, that is very complicated, continues to be discussed. This was the first time that the goal of a peaceful cyberspace was explicitly endorsed by a UN process. It also began to develop the norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior by states that were characterized as an essential measure to reduce risks to international peace, security, and stability. And that's where the famous word norms always comes, and we hear the norms. But it's also rules and principles. Several specific confidence building were enumerated by the GGE, and the need for capacity building. Capacity building, also very important. Everybody on the globe should be able to handle, discuss these issues. Capacity building is a development issue. Was complemented to cooperative global efforts on cybersecurity was flagged. Now, the 2015 report presented the high watermark for the GG process and was the first to expand from the traditional 15 members to 20 members, thus responding to the growing demand by states for participation. The report notably raised the overall cyber threat perception by speaking of a dramatic increase in incidents involving the malicious use of ICTs by state and non-state actors. The report provided the most elaborated and specific listing of confidence-building measures that included ambitious undertakings for the international sharing of information on vulnerabilities and mitigation strategies. The report also urged a norm of non-targeting of critical infrastructure providing public services. There are more to that, and there are also regional. OEC has now developed also some CBMs, but this was sort of the first time and guiding probably also processes. The 2015 report also provided the first, albeit quite modest, opening to other stakeholders with interests in preserving cyberspace for peaceful purposes. In its concluding section, the report noted that while states have primary responsibility for maintaining a secure and peaceful ICT environment, effective international cooperation would benefit from identifying mechanisms from the participation as appropriate of the private sector, academia and civil society organizations. No sooner than 2015, a report was circulated, the UN General Assembly authorized a further GGE for the 2016-17 period, which you remember mentioned, and which the number of participants were again increased to 25. This apparent positive momentum generated by the GG process, however, was concealing several major problems that will shortly manifest themselves in disruptive ways. First, the fact that the GD had become essentially the only forum at the universal level for consideration of international cybersecurity policy at the global level. This was the GGE, the governmental group of experts, that this was a distortion of the normal function of a GGE in the UN context, which was to provide an initial expert study of a new topic with follow-up recommendations, which would then be taken up by the General Assembly for action. After 4 almost consecutive GGEs, 3 of which had produced substantive reports, and I think they remain a reference, especially the 15 report, had still to be not taken up by the wider body in terms of launching negotiation of a multilateral agreement or arrangement. Concerns were being voiced that the GGE have become a way of deflecting attention from actual state conduct in cyberspace while providing major cyber powers with a convenient process to point to as a sign of their responsible behavior. Second, was the failure of leading cyber powers to arrive at the common security concept regarding the cyber operations. The Russian Federation and China had since 2011 been promoting at the UN a draft code of conduct for information security, that demonstrated a concern that information content itself could represent a threat to national security and set out a series of measures for maintaining sovereign control of their information space, the information space. This contrasted with the Western concept of cybersecurity that stressed the integrity of the interconnected system and was favorable to a free flow of content with only minimum controls to protect public welfare. This conceptual difference might have been managed over time with the right cooperative spirit, but the geopolitical environment had begun to deteriorate in a major manner. Since the Russian action in Crimea In 2014, relations among the great powers, and specifically Russia, China, and the US, had again become competitive and even adversarial. State-conducted cyber operations for espionage or military purposes had also become more salient, with several states, many states, following the US lead in developing both a dedicated military cyber units and overt offensive capabilities. The underlying tensions came to the surface with the failure of the 2016 and 17 GGE to agree on the final report. And I think, some people blame this group, but I think the overwhelming situation made it impossible at that time. So the ostensible reason for failure was disagreement on how international law is to apply to state cyber activity. A divide between the US and Western allies on the one hand and China and Russia on the other, whether international humanitarian law should apply to interstate cyber operations, and we hear from the lawyers, which was seen by the latter, China and Russia, as a tantamount to legitimizing armed conflict in cyberspace. That's their view. In better times, the representatives may have found a way to overcome this difference, but there was no longer the evident political will in the key capitals to show flexibility in these discussions or relieve some constructive ambiguity which was used. In other words, the failure of GG17 reflected the deeper rupture in the relations of major cyber powers that had allowed for a degree of cooperation in defining what responsible state behavior in cyberspace could consist of. Developments at the fall 2018 General Assembly then brought this out in dramatic fashion, and now we're coming to the present slowly. Despite the fact that previous resolution establishing GGEs had all enjoyed consensus status, the 2018 first committee session of the General Assembly was presented with two competing resolutions setting out markedly different future paths for UN work, as Professor Park introduced. After years of supporting reiterations of the GG format, Russia put forward a more ambitious resolution that foresaw the establishment in 2019 of an open-ended working group, a forum in which interested UN member states could participate. This is UN language. It means it's accessible not only to 25 countries, but to all the UN member states, plus possibly civil society, plus. So this is important. Further, and with the aim to further develop the rules, norms, of principles of responsible state behavior, and to render report to the fall of 2020. The resolution also incorporated elements from earlier GGEs, combined with selected measures from the Sino-Russian Code of Conduct for Information Science. The US, for its part, championed a resolution authorizing a standard GGE in 2019 with a mandate to study the issue of possible cooperative measures and to report back to the 2021 session of the General Assembly. After years of leading the GGEs, which remain still an opaque mechanism limited to a few states, 25, Russia was now stressing the more democratic, inclusive, and transparent nature of its open-ended working group proposal. The US and its partners were left to defend the traditional GG formula, which had become deficient in the eyes of many states. Although duplication is normally anathema in multilateral diplomacy, the two proponents of these competitive processes did not seriously engage in an effort to find compromise formulation that could restore the consensus status that previous UN cybersecurity work had enjoyed. In the end, states were obliged to vote on both resolutions, and despite the obvious disconnects and inefficiencies between them, both resolutions were adopted by wide margins. The international community is thus faced with two disconnected processes running on separate tracks and timetables with different scope for participants. The UN Secretariat and others are trying to maintain a brave face about it all, but unless some logical division of labor is created for the two processes, it's hard to see how they could both produce useful results. I'm quite optimistic that we get something, but this could be said at this point. One possibility would be that, and we hear more from you, what proposals you have, proposal to have the GG limit itself to considering the issue of applicability of international law to state cyber operations. That could be. The OEWG, in contrast, could, and its mandate, as its mandate permits, further develop the normative ideas and CBMs already generated by the earlier GGE process. It could also usefully complement these by identifying procedures for reporting and implementing through peer review mechanisms by states, something that could happen. The mere fact that OEWG activity, it's an acronym I have to learn, activity at the UN level could help spur parallel measures being developed at the regional and national level. I think that is also something important. There are efforts on the way at ASEAN level, at the OAS level, OECD level, to implement some of these norms, CBMs, and that play with the open-ended group could help. The OEW mandate explicitly calls for consultation with the private sector and civil society, which is positive signal. Although these sessions would have to be funded by external contributions. That's the wording of the resolution. So we have to find the money to do that. It will be important from some donor states of concerned corporations to provide this funding to ensure that this wider consultation occurs. Of the two processes, the OEWG will be the first out of the gate with an organizational meeting June 3, next Monday, right? And the first session mid-September, whereas the GGE will only hold its initial meeting in December. If a positive synergy is to be established between the two processes, it will require conscious leadership to that end. Once the chairpersons of the two processes are identified, these individuals should consult each other, and provision could be made for the chair of the OEW to brief the GGE and vice versa. Both chairs should ensure they brief the annual session of the UN General Assembly First Committee, which established the two processes as to the progress they are making. To conclude, in my view, the OEWG will, with its wider participation and greater transparency, is likely to provide the more important of the two processes. It has the potential to generate the take-up of states and actual norms and measures, and produce, by all states, potentially, multilateral accords to govern state behavior. It is also the most open, a vehicle most open to inputs from private sector and civil society, something that dialogue never really happened so far, which have become ever more active recently in suggesting steps for safeguarding the peaceful cyberspace. Siemens, Microsoft, Digital Geneva Initiative, and so forth. All concerned stakeholders will need to be vigilant and vocal in ensuring that great power rivalry does not gum up the works for those seeking an open, sustainable, and peaceful cyberspace. I thank you for your attention.
네, 고맙습니다. 스타파허 대사님께서 특히 유엔에서의 지지의 그동안의 활동을 중심으로 과거에 유엔에서의 활동을 설명해 주셨고, 또 한편 작년 말에 유엔에서 채택된 두 가지 결의에 따른 금년부터 활동하게 될 새로운 GG와 오픈엔디드 워킹그룹이 성공적으로 활동하려면 거기에 대한 몇 가지 또 제언도 해주셨습니다. 다음으로 이러한 대사님의 기조 발제를 바탕으로 고려대학교 사이버법센터 정면 박사께서 이 유엔에서의 이 두 가지 그 프로세스를 제가 이야기로는 어떻게 더 발전시킬 수 있을지 그런 부분들을 중심으로 발제를 해주시겠습니다. 시간은 역시 10분 내로 맞춰주시길 부탁드립니다.
Thank you for introducing me. I'm Myung-hyun Chung from Korea University. It was great pleasure to listen the great presentation by the ambassador, and I'd like to add some points, and I like not to overlap the already mentioned from the previous presentation, and. As already mentioned in the UN General Assembly, 2 resolutions, each initiated by Russia and US, were adopted for same purpose, cybersecurity, last year. And a small number of UN member states, comprising the 2 groups of like-minded for the US and Russia, were against the other regime's resolution. However, majority of developing countries approved both resolutions. And the Russian initiative was adopted by vote of 119 in favor to 46 against, with 14 abstentions. While Korea and Switzerland abstained, Estonia, Georgia, Israel, Japan, etc., and US were against. And you may see on the map that, on the other hand, while Western countries were in favor of this resolution, China, Cuba, North Korea, Egypt, etc., were against the resolution. And some developing countries in Asia and Africa abstained. And you may see the red color and the green color are almost opposite side from those vote for and against. And you may find that the countries that voted for both resolutions in this figure. The one notable difference between the 2 groups is related to their composition. The OEWG is open to all membership, and will also hold intersessional consultative meetings with businesses, non-governmental organizations, and academia. The GGE is taking more intergovernmental paths by having 25 member states on the basis of equitable geographic distribution, and by holding a series of consultations with the regional intergovernmental organizations. And those are the comparison of mandates of both resolutions for the formats and objectives, and the report and consultation. I'm not go through the mandates already mentioned in the previous ambassador presentations. With the members of 6 GGE as 25. And from the Asia, Kazakhstan is one of the Russia's closest allies, voted for both resolutions, and it's included in the 6 GG members. And India and South Africa voted in favor of both. And Brazil supported the US resolution, but abstained from voting on the Russian one. And the way forward for the OEWG and the GGE, Russia and China and others do not seem to agree to the application of international law, including the rule on self-defense, countermeasures, and international humanitarian law to cyberspace. Their ostensible reasons are the worry or possibility of the militarization of cyberspace. However, the real reason could be inferiority in technological advancement against the US and others, although China is catching up or overtaking the US in the area of AI. The US and others do not seem to agree to the negotiation of lex specialis for cyberspace, especially in the UN. Their real concerns include the recognition of more stronger and powerful control by states over cyberspace to the detriment of human rights and international cooperation. In fact, they seem to be worried about their technological advancement could be restricted by the newly clarified rules in any new treaties. The OEWG format has advantage. The resolution already includes a list of particular norms to be further developed. So it is possible for the group to focus its discussion on ways and mechanisms for their implementation. However, those listed norms and unlisted norms in the resolution may have a biased direction of the work of the OEWG. And the open composition of the group allows every member state to participate, in contrast to the limited number of members of the previous GGEs. The rule of consensus decision-making will ensure that the common interest of all participants will be included in the final documents. The report will be submitted in 2 years. That's faster than the report of GGE. However, the OEWG format has also this advantage. The open competition does not imply the participation of all or even key member states by default, and thus the composition of the group may be much smaller than desired. The mandatory consensus can play a blocking role or significantly affect the final wording of the report, making it more general in scope. The involvement of other stakeholders in the exchange of views on the issue may keep a good tone for the OEWG. The GGE, as a smaller group, can be more efficient in its work as compared to a larger group like the OEWG. The GGE format could be seen as having a strength in its principle of equitable geographical distribution in the selection of its members. The absence of binding consensus can also be viewed positively. The report would be submitted to the Secretary General in any case. The report will certainly contain those members' national position in the application of international law to the use of ICT by states. Now the two parallel processes on the same topic of cybersecurity should work together, not in exclusive competition, but in a mutual cooperation. Splitting the UN cybersecurity discussion in two groups would provide a way for member states to go forum shopping depending on issues. Although it is better for more member states to participate in the cybersecurity negotiation internationally, it would be very difficult to reach consensus among 193 member states in the OEWG, and the fifth GGE previously failed to reach consensus even among the 25 members. And the two processes might make the negotiation process for cybersecurity more difficult. Despite their differences, however, both the UN and Russia share a common interest in improving the stability of cyberspace. A majority of the member states with limited resources should also try to make the two processes alive by choosing wisely how to invest their resources between the 6GGE and OEWG. As seen, a lot of member states already supporting the both resolutions and the resulting two groups, it seems that the states might find the two processes complementary rather than mutually exclusive. In order for the two processes to be complementary, a kind of labor division might be needed. The GG would be more specialized by focusing on those issues, such as setting a legal framework for responses for cyber incidents with low threshold of harm when ICT infrastructures are involved. The OEWG would consider a framework for governmental control of ICTs while ensuring the protection of human rights in the cyber conflict. Thank you for your attention.
고맙습니다. 우리 정미연 박사께서는 이제 금년부터 활동하게 되는 GG하고 오픈엔디드 워킹 그룹에 대한 비교를 그 두 개의 결의에 규정된 맨데이트를 통해서 비교를 했고, 또 그러한 두 개의 결의가 나오게 된 그러한 배경, 또 이 GG와 오픈엔드 워킹 그룹의 장점과 단점들을 설명을 하고, 마지막으로 이러한 두 개의 시스템 프로세스가 성공적으로 활동하기 위한 그러한 조건 내지 방향도 제시를 했습니다. 다음으로 그 미국의 카네기 국제평화재단 연구원이신 그 미스터 존 베이트먼의 발제를 듣겠습니다. 이 베이트먼 씨는 그 로스쿨에서 이 JD 법학을 공부를 했습니다만, 이 개업을 하지 않고 정부에서 그동안 활동을 했습니다. 특히 최근에는 그 오바마 정부에서는 미국의 국방부에서 국방부의 그 사이버 스트래티지 관련해서 그 소위 정책 쪽에서 활동을 하신 분입니다. 이제 카네기 연구재단에는 그 가신 지는 얼마 되지는 않았습니다만, 이 베이트먼 씨께서는 그 사이버 놈을 이 소위 밀리터리 또는 다른 분야와 연결을 해서 설명을 해 주실 겁니다. 역시 10분 정도 시간을 드리겠습니다. 부탁드립니다.
Thank you, Professor Park, and everyone for joining us on the panel here at Jeju today. What we've heard from the previous panelists is a detailed discussion of the United Nations process that has been working toward norms for cyber operations. And if I could sum up some of the discussion about the limitations and challenges of that process, I think it's fair to say that the norms that we have in place today are not very strong, not very effectively enforced, and are not doing all that we need from them to contribute to international stability. After almost 20 years of attempting to develop norms for state behavior in cyberspace, many people would argue that international security in cyberspace is continuing to deteriorate rather to improve, and that most states are continuing to actually push the boundaries of cyber operations with increasing harm, including toward civilian systems. So what I'd like to do in my talk is address why this is the case. And because my background is in defense, I thought I would address the strategic context for the failure up until now to achieve an ideal set of cyber norms, a robust set of cyber norms that could truly contribute to international stability. So the first thing I'd like to say is that historically, norms of this kind are very difficult to develop. And I think this is often forgotten after 20 years, people might look at cyberspace and think, well, we have strong norms in other areas, formal and informal. For example, in nuclear weapons, we have non-proliferation treaties, we have effective strategic deterrence. Many states have committed to a no first use policy. Nuclear weapons haven't been used in over 70 years. And so often people look to this as an example of what we should seek to achieve in cyberspace. But I think what's lost in that story is how slow and painful the process was for developing those formal and informal norms. So looking back to 1945, after the United States first used nuclear weapons, the US and the Soviet Union thoroughly incorporated nuclear weapons into their military strategy and doctrine, going so far as to develop a number of tactical battlefield systems and training and exercising these regularly. In the Korean War, the US openly contemplated using nuclear weapons on the battlefield against a non-nuclear state. And as late as the Vietnam War, President Nixon sought to signal his willingness to use nuclear weapons even in that conflict. So it was only over time that a set of norms around nuclear use developed. And the non-proliferation regime also took decades to really prove itself and ultimately proved incomplete, as a number of states have actually developed nuclear weapons despite that regime. And the future prospect for non-proliferation and arms control is relatively uncertain today, given the state of international stability between great powers. So I walk you through that detailed history about nuclear weapons to then draw the contrast to cyber weapons. If we think about the two as an analogous, and there's limits to any analogy, I think it's fair to say that compared to nuclear weapons and other things like chemical weapons, cluster munitions, landmines, other forms of weapons of mass destruction or conventional weapons, we simply haven't reached the same kinds of conditions in cyberspace that we had where states had decades to develop an understanding of the meaning of these weapons for their own security, their own interests and values. A strategic equilibrium resulted where the producers and users of these weapons believed that restraints were in their interests. And tragically, there was massive human harm across multiple major conflicts in order for the activist energy to build around restraining these weapons. None of that has happened in cyberspace. All of the major cyber incidents, as damaging as they have been below the threshold of armed conflict. And actually, many states that have been victims of cyber incidents have proven relatively resilient, despite recent concerns about political interference. As a matter of fact, life moves on in countries that have experienced cyber incidents as compared to the incredible disruption that we've seen in conventional warfare in the 20th century. And so this is not to downplay the significance of cyber operations as a destabilizing and damaging force in international relations, but simply to set the context that we have really not had the time and experienced the pain and suffering for states to reach the point with cyber weapons that they've reached with other kinds of weapons. So actually, in that context, it's not surprising that a robust set of norms have not yet developed. The second point I'd like to make is that going forward, the geopolitical landscape is not auspicious for making progress toward robust cyber norms. We've already heard a lot of discussion about the return of great power competition amongst the US, China, and Russia. And so it's important to note that each of these countries is a major user of cyber operations, and a major element of this competition is technological and informational. So we can see the recent UN debate over different processes for developing norms in some sense as a diplomatic skirmish between competing spheres of influence. If we see the larger geopolitical direction as towards disorder, then it's not surprising that this would be a difficult time to develop cyber norms. Other sorts of international security arrangements like nuclear arms control treaties, non-proliferation, are dissolving or at risk. If we look at the INF, the New START, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the JCPOA, in every area of nuclear and strategic stability, we see actually a fraying of international arrangements. And that's true even in economic norms, like the use of the WTO being increasingly bypassed for trade disputes, the rising use of coercive economic tools such as tariffs and sanctions. And so with the international system as a whole essentially becoming less stable over time, one would have to hope that cyberspace would buck this trend, would be the exception. But as we know, cyberspace is known as a particularly difficult area for international governance, and so it's unlikely that that will be the case in the next few years. The final point then that I'd like to make is that the balance of power in cyberspace itself also is making it unlikely for strong, concrete improvements in the foreseeable future in cyber norms. Up until recently, one could argue that cyberspace was dominated by a small number of states, like the US and its allies, China, Russia, and some others, that were highly capable, whereas most other countries were either victims of cyber operations or sitting on the sidelines. That's perhaps a relatively hopeful state for the development of norms because most countries could see themselves as victims of cyber operations and have a strong interest in imposing restraint on the primary users of operations. But this is gradually changing over time as smaller and medium-sized powers are emerging as cyber powers. The United Arab Emirates, Mexico, India, Pakistan, a lot of countries are gaining new cyber capabilities. And so as these capabilities spread and as there's an equalization of cyber capabilities and erosion of the competitive advantage of the elite nations, actually over time more countries might see themselves as potential users of offensive cyber capabilities and might be more inclined to take a wait-and-see attitude toward norms. We heard from the ambassador about how in the George W. Bush administration the U.S. was disinclined to pursue cyber arms control, and this was in part because the U.S. saw itself as a potential user of this tool and wanted to see how the strategic situation would develop over time before restraining itself. It's possible that in the future, more and more countries will see themselves in that sort of position. So to summarize, the strategic situation does not bode well towards progress for a robust cyber norms in the coming years. As we've heard from the panelists, with the coming challenges for both the GGE and the open-ended working group, the international system might look less to the outcomes of these processes and more toward seeing optimism in the process itself and the fact that necessary conversations are happening with an increasing number of states. We can hope that over time these necessary conversations could preserve the conditions for progress if the rest of the international system can move toward creating the rest of those conditions. Thank you.
우리 베이트먼 씨께서는 첫 시작을 우리 앞에 두 분께서 지난 20년간의 유엔에서의 지지를 통한 그 사이버 시큐리티에 대한 국제사회에서의 논의의 경과를 그 앞에 두 분께 설명해 주셨는데 그 20년 동안에 실제로 이 국제사회에서의 사이버 시큐리티는 더 좀 엉망이 되어가고 있다라고 일침을 놓으시고 이 현 상황을 규범적으로 또 전략적으로 설명을 해주셨습니다. 그래서 이제 지금 세 분께서 이 사이버 시큐리티에 대한 국제적인 흐름을 큰 그림을 그려주셨고요. 이제 그 두 분의 국제법 전문가를 모시겠습니다. 우선 그 반자이 교수님이신데요. 일본의 명문인 와세다 대학교 법대 교수님이시고요. 또 국제법 전공하셨습니다. 그 특히 국제법 중에 이 듀 딜리전스라고 굉장히 그 좀 민감한 그런 주제에 대해서 설명을 해주시겠습니다. 역시 10분 시간을 드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much, Park No-hyun 교수님, for introducing me to the distinguished participants. When I heard today's theme of the cybersecurity for the first time, I thought of it as a timely topic in the era that many social changes and the conflicts associated therewith have been caused by the development of technologies. Among them, now, the issues on cyber show a possibility of a new lifestyle, and at the same time, they pose serious problems in various fields. And the cyber issues are pressing for answer to a question about how traditional concepts of international law shall be adapted to new emerging trends in international community. Today, I would like to approach this matter from the perspective of security as one of core concepts of international law. My approach will, in general, get along with the distinguished presentation by the first speaker, Ambassador Fashil. A traditional security has a limited scope of political independence and territorial integrity expressed in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. Considering some recent cases, however, the threats to cybersecurity extend from cyber crimes to cyber attacks, parallel with the level of armed attack like one against critical infrastructures, for example, against military installations, oil pipelines, dams, electric system, and medical system, and so on. In addition, they come to include the threat to the decision-making process of a state, such as several kinds of activities to interfere into the election and vote process, to manipulate the public opinions, as currently reported in the US. The debate for the effective legal framework on cybersecurity has just begun, though the threats mentioned above are now becoming apparent and tangible. In 2015, the UN group of governmental experts on cybersecurity emphasized the importance of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the principle of sovereignty as a basis for increased security in the use of information and communication technologies by states. While recognizing the need for further study, the group noted the inherent right of states to take measures consistent with international law and as recognized in the Charter. The group also noted the established international legal principles, including, where applicable, the principles of humanity, necessity, proportionality, and distinction. According to the Tarim Manual 2.0 of 2017, the law of state responsibility, as one of applicable rules of general international law, shall play an important role in ensuring international peace and cooperation. Among them, the principle of due diligence is considered as a useful regulatory means to implement particular obligations to secure national critical infrastructure vulnerable to attacks. Under the principle of due diligence, states are obliged to refrain from internationally harmful omissions resulting in significant transboundary harm, also when such harm is to be the result of an online activity initiated from within or translated through state jurisdiction under its power or control. But it may be sometimes be difficult to perceive such harm as the injury caused by internationally wrongful act. In 2001 articles on the law of state responsibility by the UNILC, the injury is comprehensively defined as any damage, material or moral, but it excludes merely abstract concerns or general interest of a state which is individually unaffected by the breach of obligations of other states. The threats mentioned above now reach all three layers of cyberspace, composed of physical layer of hardware, logical layer of software, and social layer of individuals and groups using the soft and hardwares. The traditional concept of damage covers certain portion of the threats to these three layers, but it can be highly hard to establish the existence of concrete material or moral damage caused by, for instance, the interference to election and vote process to manipulate the public opinion in a state. And also it may be impossible to specify a conduct in question attributable to a state committed in cyberspace allowed to act in an anonymous form. Therefore, it is much more important to prevent the threats for actualizing rather than post-damage remedies. This can be achieved by particular security obligations put onto private companies and executed within their internal security policies. And those national laws need to reflect a well-informed international consensus supported by solid technical knowledge when reflecting individual economic and technological capabilities of each state. From this perspective, it may be essential to promote the efforts to make dialogue for capacity building against cybersecurity in a regional or global level. Japan now takes a positive position to advance such a dialogue with the nations of ASEAN and in the areas, for example, the mutual exchange of information has been made through OSCE. OSCE is Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and OAS, Organization of American States. And the UK has tackled the cyber issues within the framework of Commonwealth. In this field, Japan and Korea will be able to cooperate to contribute to upgrading the level of cybersecurity in Asian region. Thank you very much.
우리 반자희 교수님께서 보통 우리가 이제 전통적인 국제법이라고 하는데 이것이 이제 지금 새로운 인간이 만든 도메인 사이버 공간에 적용되는 문제를 설명을 해주셨습니다. 특히 탈리 매뉴얼 2.0을 소개를 해주시면서 그 중에서도 이 듀 딜리전스가 국제 위법 행위를 방지하는데 도움이 될 수 있다라고 강조를 하셨고요. 마지막으로 특히 한국과 일본이 이 분야에서 특히 커패시티 빌딩이나 컨피던스 빌딩에서 좀 협력을 하면 좋겠다고 아주 좋은 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 마지막으로 국립외교원의 유중구 교수님을 모십니다. 유 교수님께서는 국제법을 전반적으로 다루시면서 특히 이 사이버 시큐리티 그리고 우주에서의 또 사이버 시큐리티 문제까지 지금 다루고 계십니다. 역시 또 10분 시간 드리겠습니다.
Thank you, Chair. Let me begin by some special thanks to the rapporteur, Dr. Park, and also institution of Korea Cyber Law Institution for organizing this meaningful event. Before addressing my legal issue, I just only point out one aspect of governance issue. If you think about at the time of the cyber issue is incorporated in UN agenda 1998, only 2.8% of world population could use the internet. And then in 2002, first GG was set up, around 8% world population could use the internet. Now almost 60% and near 10 decades, probably 90% of the world population can use the internet. That means in the international governance issue, today all the speakers mentioned about the two platforms for discussion. So we have to anyway solve the inclusive issue for the discussing the cybersecurity. So also at the first time, beginning of the fifth GGE, there is four main future format to be addressed. One for continuing the GGE, and then set up the open-ended working group, and then using existing UN agency, and then lastly creating new body in the UN system. So two possible options for the discussing the cybersecurity GG in OEWG was set up. and then probably in the ongoing discussion for the future GBG and both of the OEWG and in GG platform probably discuss that issue about how to use existing UN agency and also creating new body. That's one governance issue I want to address. As for the legal aspects, nowadays we are facing two phenomena of international law. One for the there is two kinds of international law: international law, unilateral international law, which means by polarization international law, arguing against each other. You are the unilateral international law. My law is the international law. That's the one phenomena. Second phenomena is revitalization sovereignty issue. So as Professor Banjai mentioned that sovereignty is very important, particularly in Asian region. Their special, peculiar historical background, sovereignty is a core element for an Asian country. As you can also agree, sovereignty has two aspects, like two faces of one coin, right and obligation. So Banjai mentioned that is due diligence, one of the core elements of sovereignty issue. So there is two kinds of option and perspective about sovereignty. One is sovereignty is self-standing legal obligation. So breach the sovereignty itself constitutes of some violation of sovereignty, and then also has any bring into the international wrongful acts. That's the one view. Another view for the sovereignty is just general principle of international law. From sovereignty principle, lots of other some specific rules can be deduced, like non-intervention issue and some non-resort to the maybe use of force something. So there is two kinds of sovereignty perspective. And another issue for cybersecurity, international humanitarian law. So basically, online and online, IHL should be applied in its entirety. Problem is some maybe states and then argue that the application of IHL is like a presuppose of militarization. But if you think about the current situation, state practices, and most of the country and has a military manual, if you think about that situation, application of the IHL, it doesn't mean necessarily presupposition of militarization. That's the one IHL issue. And also about the IHL, I want to add one more point about the application of IHL, because in IHL we can divide into two categories. One for some weapons law, which means we have to evaluate the superfluous unnecessary harm. That's basic concept of weapons law of IHL. The other pillar for targeting law, even if the weapon or some tools and methods of some new technology is maybe lawful, but have to operate in a very maybe legitimate way of operation. That's some targeting issue. So most of some new technology like AI and then other autonomous weapon system, they currently focus on the Article 36 in the legal review of weapons law. It means that even if we think about the application of IHL, it doesn't necessarily mean the presupposition of militarization. That's my personal opinion. And then thirdly, there is international human rights law issue. international human rights law issue, we can think about like IHL application, the law fully apply in online and offline. But problem is in jurisdiction issue because it's based on the personal jurisdiction and then peculiar aspects of a cyber domain, which means one virtual space with one connectivity. So extraterritorial application of human rights is also one of the crucial issues to debate. That's an international humanitarian law aspects. Lastly, I want to mention about major cases. We have to imagine three kinds of lawful measure. Is maybe peacetime in countermeasure, and plea of necessity under the draft of the state responsibility, and then lastly self-defense measure. So those three kinds of measure, whether it's lawful or and under the certain circumstances how to apply and then use the three some lawful measure, particularly thinking about the collective countermeasure issue, and then attribution issue, the standard of attribution, how much, how and then low and high, some intensity to maybe raise the evidence issue. That's maybe can be the some countermeasure and self-defense issue. So before wrapping my comment, we have to think about why the cyber application, international law to cyberspace is important. Because it's basically core UN architecture for the international peace and security. There is one legal element which I can say that state-based self-defense system. So cybersecurity cases that due to their peculiar technology, it stimulates those kinds of UN pillar. We have to think about the non-state actor, and we have to think about the calibration aspect of some cyber skill, which means that it's not the exact same to the conventional weapon system. So personally, those four kinds of international law is very still developing. And then, as I previously mentioned, that I hopefully it will not and should not be bipolarized. Thank you for the listening.
네, 우리 유 교수님께서 다 적기 어려울 정도로 많은 이슈를 제시를 하셔갖고 다시 처음부터 우리 세션을 시작해야 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 만약에 더 토론할 이슈가 없으면은 다시 유 교수님께 부탁드려서 더 말씀을 드려도 될 것 같습니다. 그 5분의 발제 또 토론 발제를 들었습니다. 사실 오늘 첫날이고 마지막 세션이라서 또 다른 세션하고 지금 경쟁하고 있는 상황인데 그래도 저희가 우리끼리 몇 분이나 저 오디언스로 오실까 저희가 좀 생각도 해봤는데 그래도 생각보다 많이 오셨습니다. 많이 오셔서 감사드리고요. 시간이 좀 여유가 있습니다만 저희가 40분까지 끝내기로 되어 있습니다. 그래서 마지막에 한 5분 정도는 오늘 발제 토론하신 분들께 한 1분여 시간을 드릴 거고요. 그 전까지 그 플로어에서 코멘트나 질문을 좀 받도록 하겠습니다. 이 동시 통역이기 때문에 뭐 우리말로 또 영어로 편하게 코멘트 질문해 주시고요. 대신에 그 말씀하시기 전에 그 소속 성함 정도는 좀 밝혀주시면 감사드리겠습니다. 예, first.
Yeah. My name is Boris Kondoch. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Peacekeeping. I'm also teaching in Korea at a small countryside university. I've met Professor Park more than almost 15 years ago for the first time. He might remember, but he might not remember, but that doesn't matter now. I have a couple of questions. First to Ambassador Staufferer, lieber Herr Botschafter. I was wondering about to what extent the issue of evidence and attribution has been discussed in the General Assembly. I think this is one of the hot issues. How do you prove that you have been attacked by a state and non-state actors? Then to Dr. Bateman and Professor Chong. Dr. Bateman said there have been no robust rules developed. I'm a little bit wondering about that kind of statement. Maybe he could explain a little bit more. Do we really need new rules? I think the old ones are sufficient. To Professor Chong, she mentions the Chinese government does not agree with the application of the use in bello to cyberspace. My question is, what are the counter arguments? My personal opinion is if cyber attacks have the same consequences like kinetic, chemical or biological attacks, this could trigger the right to self-defense. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
네, 고맙습니다. 그 질문을 좀 더 바꾸서 그 나중에 같이 함께 그 답을 듣는 게 좋을 것 같습니다. 또 질문이나 코멘트를 받겠습니다. Yes, please.
My name is Angela Kane. I am the former High Representative for Disarmament Affairs at the UN. I have a lot of exposure at the UN, and I was actually in charge at the time of the GGE of the 2013-2015. But I just want to go not about the past, but I also want to go in terms of the future. And what I find very interesting is with the effort now that you have an open-ended working group and a GGE, and there was the recommendation that I think is also in the resolution that they should kind of consult and cooperate, etc. Let me tell you from my experience, I doubt that that's going to happen. If it happens, it's very much a pro forma affair, but nothing is really going to come out of it. And I also believe that, frankly, the issue is in the first committee of the General Assembly, but as I think you mentioned, it came out of the Russian effort from 1998. I mean, basically, this was about the military application of cyber, and that was the part where it landed. But on the other hand, it's gone far beyond that. And one of the disadvantages of having a GGE is that it's very much a closed shop. They can consult with private industry, but there are no advocacy groups like you've seen with lethal autonomous weapons systems, for example. There is no activity there that actually they can draw on and that would actually motivate them and push them in a certain direction. That, to my mind, is very much a concern. Plus the GGE, and again, I was in favor of expanding it because with 15 members, you have the P5 already there, and that means that they want to dominate the scene. And you have other countries, and you've seen some of them that are on these forums that are maybe certainly not as qualified in this matter as many of the P5, let's put it that way. So that's one of the issues, and they do have a hold on it because it's a consensus. Now with the open-ended working group, it will be very interesting to see whether actually those countries that are the P5 are going to participate in it. Be very, very interesting. But what is unusual is that it's gone on for such a long time without coming up with a concrete recommendation to have a negotiating mandate, even if it is a limited negotiating mandate, for one aspect. And the other aspect that I want to bring in, and that's another complicating factor in a way, or maybe a facilitating factor, is that the Secretary General last year started a high-level panel on digital cooperation. And that, we haven't seen the outcome. It's coming up this summer. So I'll be very, very interested to see what will happen. It's headed by Melinda Gates and Jack Ma. It's a very good group, and I know that they've been very active. But how are they going to weigh into this? So the question is really, where does that rubber hit the road? Where do we actually go in terms of the negotiation? What do we actually come out of it? And my proposal has always been is make it limited, because it's grown so much since this was first started that now it's this amorphous area. I mean, is it military? Is it economic cyber use? Is it social use? I mean, all of you have mentioned these issues. Very interesting, but unless you limit it somehow, I think it'll be very, very difficult to make significant progress and find consensus and agreement. Thank you.
그 유엔에서의 경험의 바탕을 두고 그 GG의 한계 또 앞으로 어떻게 나가야 될지에 대해서 설명을 해주셨습니다. 감사드리고요. 예, 또
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Thomas Bierstecker. I'm a professor at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. Very interesting presentations, mostly about processes and about the politics of the processes. But I wonder if and this isn't directed to any specific panelist, but I wonder if panel members could talk a little bit more about the content of the norms, not the I agree very much. We do not have robust norms in this domain, but do we have nascent norms, emerging norms, things like it's not necessarily seen through multilateral negotiations, but through practices that are already have been underway. We know there's constant probing. We know there is, up to this point, a relatively limited nature of attacks, which is evidence of some degree of self-restraint, possibly. We have processes of attribution and the use of emergency response teams in certain cases, in cases of private attacks. And we also have now the emergent development of the use of sanctions in response to cyber activity. So I wonder if the panel members could reflect a bit on emergent or nascent norms. Thanks.
프로세스도 중요하고 그 컨텐츠에 대한 문제 제기를 해주셨는데요. 시간이 지금 8분 남았는데 혹시 지금 외국분께서만 질문 코멘트 해주셨는데 한국분께서 혹시 질문 코멘트 해주실 수 있을지요? 예.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 고려대학교에서 국제법을 전공하고 있는 홍진영 학생입니다. 저는 개인적으로 사이버 공간상에서 비국가 행위자들 사적 주체들의 행위에 관해서 관심이 있는데요. OEWG에서는 이제 비즈니스 섹터나 뭐 NGO 등 이런 사적 주체들의 참여가 이제 가능해진 걸로 알고 있습니다. 저는 이 OEWG의 논의에서 이들의 역할이 얼마나 될지, 그리고 사이버 공간상 규범을 형성하는데 이들이 얼마나 방향성을 설정할 수 있을지, 이런 영향력을 여쭙고 싶습니다.
어느 분께 여쭤보는 거예요?
그냥 특정하진 않고. 네.
오케이. 질문 코멘트가 아주 좋은 질문 코멘트 해주셨고요. 시간이 이제 얼마 안 남았기 때문에 차라리 그냥 5분께 아까 첫 번째 질문 해주신 분께서는 우리 대사님하고 베이트먼 씨하고 정 박사께 질문 주셨습니다만 이 5분께서 구체적인 질문 또는 전반적인 질문에 대해서 말씀을 해 주시면서 이번 세션 끝내는 걸로 하겠습니다. 순서는 거꾸로 하겠습니다. 우리 유 교수님 먼저 답을 주시면서 우리 대사님한테 끝내도록 하겠습니다. 부탁드립니다.
Thank you for very much precise question. So I just maybe finalize my answer for the two aspects. One for the process Madame mentioned, and then the other for the content. We have to think about the 5 principles of operation process of UNGG. We may say a normative, voluntary, limited membership, export-driven, and consensus-based approach. That's the 5 operation principles. But if you, when I mentioned that some inclusiveness like AI, and then there is 3 kinds of GGE now has been operating outer space in AI and then cyberspace. So outer space limited membership, the same like the cyber security did before, and then outer space, the AI is some open-ended working group system. So in open-ended working group system, chairmanship do a very crucial role, and then also she mentioned that some multi-stakeholder like ICRC and other business sector will do a crucial role. And lastly, for content issue, I just only mention about that attribution issue. Attribution issue, we can think about three kinds of attribution: is political, technical, and legal attribution. So if you have to combine those kinds of three attribution issue in the norm setting in the upcoming OEWG and then some GG issue, problem is issue concept of attribution is very different from state to state, because we might think about what are the crucial roles for the law and norms. We have to keep the balance, legality issue and legitimacy issue. So if you break the balance between those two crucial criteria, maybe we can personally, I hope, compromise for those three kinds of attribution process. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Professor Panjai, please.
Thank you very much. And yeah, so I would like to add the information on self-defense because Professor Yu mentioned about the self-defense. So I'd like to the issues of the self-defense in Japan to my presentation. When cyber attack is done against critical infrastructure in Japan, and it reaches the level or scale of armed attack, this situation can be discussed in the context of self-defense of Article 51 of the UN Charter. Even under the present Constitution of Japan, it is generally interpreted that Japan has a right of self-defense. But it is thought that Japan shall not have its capability to attack enemy bases. So the sole option of defense within the territory of a state cannot be enough to fully protect life, person, and property of its nations from cyber attacks. So Japan will have only limited capacity of a state to protect them if it shall keep the current policy without capability to attack enemy bases as well as espionage capability. So the contents of the norms, especially about the self-defense, from the perspective of the Japanese case, there is very serious problems to protect our nations from cyber attacks. And this is the issues of the alliance issues with the U.S. So the U.S. shall have a scope of the defense for Japan in order to protect the cyber attacks from other nations. So this is a very important issue to Japanese case. Thank you very much.
Okay, then, Professor Panjai, may I ask a brief question? So do you think Japan is relying on a kind of collective self-defense in the case with the U.S.?
But there is only 1 minute, so I cannot answer in a very limited minute. So I'd like to answer your questions in the next time or after this session. Please forgive me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, may I ask Mr. Bateman, please?
Just very briefly on the question directed at me, the first part was why am I saying that there's no robust rules today? And I would say that's because the cyber norms that we've been discussing coming out of the UN process, first of all, are voluntary and non-binding. Second of all, they're generally pretty ambiguous and vague and leave a lot of outs for states to do things and claim they still were consistent with the norms. And then finally, they're poorly enforced. And so you can compare all of this against actual state practice, which has been extremely aggressive in recent years. A lot of people point to the WannaCry and NotPetya mass global ransomware attacks causing billions of dollars, disruption of hospitals and so forth. It's clear that that exemplifies that states are still pushing the boundaries toward harm on civilian systems, and the norms that we have in place are insufficient. And so the second part of your question is, do we need new norms, or are the old ones good enough? Part of the problem is that most of the strategically significant cyber operations fall below this threshold of armed conflict, armed attack, use of force. So we have fewer existing rules that apply in those cases. Many significant cyber operations could be classified as espionage or merely the spread of information, including Russian cyber interference in elections. So these are areas where previous to the cyber era, there were not strong rules, but those rules are needed today.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Zhang.
Yeah, I also learned a lot from the comments from the floor, so thank you very much. For the question about the China, China is not agree with the IR application of IR in the cyber attacks. But Russia and China has the same position. So not they want the new separate treaty, the new treaty, to form under the UN auspice. So they are not agree with the application of IL, the existing IL into the cyberspace. They just want to more a specific treaty and in the cyberspace to be applied. So that's why I'm mentioning that. And the other thing that about the contents of the norms and something like that, I think the regional platform can be a good basis for the further discussions, as the norms and confidence building measures are already discussed under the GGE and also OSCE and SCO, etc. And those UN resolutions also encourage that the regional efforts and request to collaborate with the relevant regional organizations such as AU, EU, OAS, and OSCE. So those norms concretely already set the norms under the UN First GG report. I think that's the good starting point. That's a good basis for the further discussion to be started. So those two processes, even though the Russian resolution tried to in some point to change the norm already agreed in the UNGG report, I think that those reports should be the basis to start with. Thank you.
Okay, lastly, Ambassador, you should give a concluding remark.
Thank you very much. I fully support the last, particularly the last speaker. And I think also there, what we have still, it has not legally binding, but I think it's written, it's concrete, and you can present that, and you could say at some point the P3s have agreed to it. But with regard to your point, the sort of overloading or be specific, I mean, if it's really strategic military, I think the GG, that's what, the first committee. But since it has been mentioned, we have now overlaying complexities of challenges, what we call human security. And we have submitted a report to the Digital Cooperation under the title Human Digital Security, because this is something that is concerning our citizens and not states. And it's getting complicated, including disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, surveillance. Surveillance is dealt with in committee, the third committee, and so forth. So we have to open up the debate, and the GGE is not the right place, and people asking for it. So I think it's unavoidable that we now, with regard to the attribution, I don't think there is any mention or agreement on attribution, and it also because it's too sensitive in a say. You mentioned certs, certs. Sometimes they are private. So what we are thinking of proposing is from civil society, academia, business, is to build our own system of trusted network of attribution labs, and build conclusion on incidents. I mean, the Huawei, the jury is out there, But so let's have some people look at it and then in a trusted network of peers and review them from a civil society perspective, and maybe that could help. There will be no UN organizations who will have the authority to do that. I don't think that's realistic. So we need a combination of both. Thank you.
네, 5분 시간 지났고요. 마지막으로 우리 대사님 말씀 중에 그 어트리뷰션 관련해서는 우리들도, 그러니까 제 듣기로는 이제 국가들뿐만 아니라 시빌 소사이티 또는 아카데미아도 그 참여를 해서 그런 시스템을 만들 수 있다. Is it alright? sorry. Okay, 됐어. Yes. 그래서 만약에 제가 올바로 이해했다면은 내년에 여기서 다시 한번 어트리뷰션을 가지고 저희가 그 세션 하나 만들어도 되지 않을까 생각했습니다. 오늘 첫날의 마지막 세션에 다소 좀 무거운 하지만 꼭 필요한 주제를 가지고 이 자리에 참석해 주신 모든 분들께 감사드리고 특히 오늘 그 발제 토론해 주신 전문가들께도 깊이 감사드립니다. 그럼 이상으로 오늘 이 세션 마치겠습니다. 고맙습니다.